Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington by attorney Qasim Rashid. He's a Democratic candidate for the Virginia State Senate. In Houston, Texas, we have former Republican congressional candidate and Marine Corps combat veteran Jesse Kelly. He also hosts his own conservative radio show. And in Columbus, Ohio, is Joseph Parrott. He's an assistant history professor at the Ohio State University, specializing in American politics. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Qasim Rashid, multiple atrocities once again. Innocents being massacred by young men with guns. Is the president a part of the problem?
Well, I think the facts speak for themselves. When you have a president who has used rhetoric calling migrants invaders and using words on people of color like infestation, echoing the horrific verbiage used by Nazi Germany, when you have him telling people, women of color, to go back, notwithstanding that they're all U.S. citizens, when you have him laughing at rallies when someone says to shoot migrants, and then someone acts on those so-called jokes, I think there's absolutely clear lines of correspondence between what the president is joking about or allowing and how extremists are acting. We just saw Caesar, I can't remember his full, Caesar Sayak, I think, the guy in Florida who sent bombs to numerous Democratic candidates and commentators, saying that he was radicalized by the president, by the rhetoric out of Fox News. So, you know, words have meanings, words have consequences. And when someone with the power and authority of the president tries to utilize those words for destructive purposes and then people act on them, you can't just wash your hands clean and say, you know, let's blame video games. Right. There needs to be accountability and some responsibility taken to stop these kinds of atrocities.
So when the president says, Qasim, we, in one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy, you think that's just his speechwriter, that's not him being sincere at all?
Well, again, you know, you have 4 years of rhetoric against people of color, against Muslims, against migrants, against women of color, against Mexicans, using the most horrific language, calling them rapists, calling them criminals, you know, disparaging countries of Africa. And then you have one sentence after people are killed, now calling for unity and against racism. I think it's lip service. Let's have some action. Let's reinvest in stopping white supremacy terrorism. The fact that the president defunded attempts by the government to neutralize and stop white supremacist groups is more telling. The fact that he took money away from anti-radicalization groups is more telling. So words are a start, but they're not nearly enough to undo the damage that's already been done.
Jesse Kelly, is there anything that Qasim said that you agree with?
No, actually there wasn't. And it's not that I have anything against him, but look, I choose to only hold the mass shooter accountable, the mass murderer accountable. I don't choose to hold politicians accountable. I mean, that killer in Dayton, I won't name him because I don't believe in naming them, was a huge leftist, was a huge Elizabeth Warren fan. That horrible monster in El Paso was a big fan of universal health care and was worried about the environment. These guys are complicated, insane, crazy people. I don't hold politicians accountable for such things, and nor do I think Democrats want to go down that road of holding people accountable for who they're fans of, especially when we have a Democrat Party that accuses ICE of being like concentration camp guards. They use rhetoric like our detention facilities for illegal immigrants are like Auschwitz and things like that. Those are insane things to say. So I disagree with them. But when somebody acts on that, when some nut job acts on that, I don't hold them accountable.
There has been a change here. And it's unfortunate, I hate to say this, but I've covered this story for so long, I've been able to witness the changes here. When you have someone like Ted Cruz even name white supremacy, you have the president even name white supremacy, that's a new thing, right? The fact that they're even calling it domestic terrorism, that's a new thing. The New York Post, which is ostensibly right-wing, coming out with a major editorial saying it's time to ban weapons of war. That's a new thing. In Ohio, the Republican governor saying we need expanded background checks. It tells me that they're all waking up to the idea that this is more than just the gunman himself being responsible for his atrocity. There's something deeper wrong, and we need to face up to it. It's not the Democrats saying this. So, Jesse, something's afoot here. Something's changing, right?
Yes, something bad is changing. Everything you just mentioned, those people are wrong. I don't care that they have Republican by their name. I don't care that the New York Post is thought to be a right-wing place, a right-wing publication. Those people are dead wrong. The worst thing you can do after a mass shooting or any kind of horrible tragedy is any legislation at all, whether that be right-wing, left-wing, whatever it is. Give people a chance to calm down, let emotions calm down, and approach things from a reasonable manner. And reducing people's gun rights is the last thing in the world we need to do right now. I just saw a video this morning. One of the survivors from El Paso was laying there in a hospital bed saying, "I wish my grandmother was there with her 38. When you have a mass murderer, a psychopath trying to kill as many people as possible, what you're thinking in that moment is not more gun laws. You're thinking, I wish I had a gun. We need to expand gun rights, not reduce gun rights.
Okay. Joseph Parrott, so I'm going to put aside the video games thing because the data shows there's absolutely no causation or correlation. I mean, when I was a kid, they said that young people listening to Marilyn Manson and playing video games would become violent, right? I mean, that stuff just has no basis, right? But what we've heard is, okay, guns, mental health, white supremacist ideology, the president creating an anti-immigrant tone. Out of all those things, is it one of them? Is it a combination of them? What's behind what we're seeing and the spate of atrocities that we've seen innocent Americans having to experience?
Well, I mean, I think honestly, and I'm not an expert on gun legislation here on these gun atrocities, but I think we can see that there are a lot of issues that are going on, and not every gunman has the same motivations. But one of the reasons why this conversation is changing is because in the last few years we have seen a rise of gun violence coming from white supremacists and coming from some of these people who are holding these kind of invasion type rhetoric ideas and that we need to defend against this. And I think what's important here is that these are fringe people, these are fringe groups, but they don't want to be on the fringe. They want to be in the center of this conversation. And so some of these attacks, like if you look at reports coming out of El Paso, they want to incite this larger movement. And so one of the things that they're actually looking for is legitimacy. And so I don't think the president is trying to incite violence. I don't think he believes he is inciting violence. One of the things that's happening is when he's using the same rhetoric, when he's using this invasion rhetoric, and when he's backing away from some of his official statements like he did in Charlottesville, saying they're good people on both sides. This is what some of these white supremacists want, right? They want that legitimacy. They want this mainstream talking point that they can say, hey, we're not on the fringe. We're at the vanguard of this movement. And I think that's what's troubling people. That's what's troubling folks in the Republican Party. That's what's troubling folks in the Democratic Party. And that's what's troubling people in general, right? We're worried about what this rhetoric is doing to legitimize these ideas.
Qasim Rashid, is it more difficult to have a unified theory of this or an elegant theory of this when you consider, as Jesse Kelly mentioned, that in Dayton, we don't have all the facts, but it seems as if the guy was probably a hard leftist. He was probably an Antifa fan from his Twitter account and so on. So it's a little bit more complicated than just to say that this guy watched Trump and felt inspired and triggered by what Trump said about migrants and went to shoot up people. Dayton seemed to be completely different to what happened in Texas.
Well, again, I think one thing he said that was telling is that he doesn't want to hold politicians accountable, and that's unfortunately the problem here. What we find, and as I'm running for office right now, I'm canvassing with Republicans and Democrats, and one thing we find universally is that Republicans and Democrats want more responsible gun legislation. Nobody in their right mind wants to make it easy for terrorists, domestic abusers, and violent people to get guns. In fact, over 90% of Americans, Republicans and Democrats combined, want to have stronger gun legislation to ensure that law-abiding citizens can get guns and extremists and terrorists can't. And the fact that the Republicans are still refusing to move an inch on this issue shows how out of touch they are with society. What we need to do is recognize that responsible gun legislation doesn't hinder freedom. It doesn't create more danger. It doesn't create a lack of access. It actually enhances those things. And the evidence of that is every developed country in the world, whether it's our neighbor Canada, whether it's the United Kingdom, whether it's Germany, whether it's Japan. Every developed country in the world has responsible gun legislation, and they rank higher than America on safety. They rank higher than America on peace. They rank higher than America on human freedom. So this is not some theory, some cockamamie idea that the only way to stop a bad guy with the gun is a good guy with the gun. It's nonsense. What we saw in Dayton, for example, this individual, this terrorist, was taken down within 30 seconds. And despite that, he killed 9 of our fellow neighbors and injured over 20 more. Less than 30 seconds is all the time he needed to destroy 9 lives and all the hundreds of people that knew them. So I'm running this campaign for state senate on principles, on facts, not on theories.
Okay.
And the facts tell us
Okay.
that Republicans and Democrats alike want responsible gun legislation, and the world has shown us that responsible gun legislation makes us safer, makes it easier to access for responsible law-abiding citizens, and makes it more difficult for terrorists and extremists to access guns. That shouldn't be controversial.
So Jesse Kelly, what Qasim's basically saying is that you have such a religious devotion to the Second Amendment that you're willing to stick to that even at the expense of kids' lives because gun rights come first.
Well, I don't care if that's what he's saying. He's wrong. And look, we can cite all these examples of other countries. Let's cite examples within our own country. How are things in Baltimore these days? How are things in Chicago these days? These are cities with some of the strictest gun laws in the United States of America, and I believe Baltimore just tallied up their 200th murder this year. The truth of the matter is gun laws don't make anybody safer. A psychopathic killer is going to find a way to get a weapon, whether that be a gun or a car or anything else. They are going to find a way to get a weapon. And it's not a theory that a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. We have example after example of that. And we don't need to bring up other nations and what they're doing because other nations do not have the Second Amendment. We do in the United States of America, and as much as people may hate it, it is the law of the land. And if you don't like it, try to amend the Constitution. Until then, I am allowed to have as many weapons as I want, as much ammunition as I want, and I am allowed to have them for the express purpose of maintaining freedom and defending myself, and I will continue to do so.
Qasim?
So again, this is, we're not working with facts anymore. My parents bought us a hunting rifle when we were young. We've been raised on guns. I understand safe gun usage. My brother is a U.S. Marine veteran. He brags about the fact that he shot expert every year while in the Marine Corps. This is not being anti-Second Amendment. It's being pro-value of human life. I grew up in Chicago. People keep bringing up Chicago, ignoring the fact that it's actually only the 16th most violent city in America, and the most violent ones are, in fact, like Louisiana and New Orleans, because they have 0 gun laws. And the only reason you have gun violence so high in Chicago is because right next door in Indiana, they have absolutely no gun legislation whatsoever, so people go 5 miles, cross the border, and bring the guns back in. What we need to do is look at the facts and not have this blind devotion to something that is contrary to human values. And the facts tell us that responsible gun legislation that prevents extremists or makes it more difficult for terrorists to get guns actually works. The states in America right now that have responsible gun legislation have lower gun deaths, have higher rates of safety, as opposed to those who have 0 gun legislation have higher gun deaths and lower rates of safety. So by all means, have your guns, protect yourself, but let's stop extremists and terrorists from getting guns. That is what we're talking about. Not law-abiding citizens. We're talking about preventing terrorists from getting guns. Why is that controversial for you?
Okay, I want to go to Joseph Parrott here. And once again, big picture. Let's go to the history professor here. When we look back at 2019 and we analyze this culture war that the United States is in right now, how will we look at this era and the debate over the aftermath of atrocities, whether in a school or at a Walmart?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's one that we won't be able to deal with for a little while because I think we are maybe at a turning point. But this is one of the things, actually, this rhetoric of sentimentalists, of hysteria, of these emotional reformers, this isn't new. This is actually a problem that we've been dealing with since the 1920s. And it was gun lobbyists. There's a historian named Pamela Hague who's written about this. It was gun lobbyists, gun industry representatives who were trying to dismiss reformers as essentially hysterical and emotional. And this was a conversation we were having 100 years ago. And I think one of the things that's important about this, one of the things that's important about the emotions of this moment is it's mobilizing people to act, to break out of this lethargy where we feel like we can't do anything, where this is just the way the United States is. And we've seen in other places around the country, Australia, which did not have the Second Amendment, Mr. Kelly's absolutely right, but did have, among other things, this gun culture, this settler culture. After the Port Arthur massacre of, I believe, 1995 or 1996, there was change because they were led by individuals who were willing to make a change, politicians who were willing to make a change. And if we have individuals like Mike DeWine in Ohio, who is willing to kind of embrace some of these changes, if we have a few people from both parties who are willing to come together around common sense gun laws, maybe there's something that can actually happen. But we need to actually move away from, I think, this emotionalism of attachment to gun rights and actually talk about the facts that are going around this. Because one of the things that we've seen is we can't even do studies on guns or gun-related deaths in the United States because the NRA and other lobbying groups prevent the federal government from investing in that. So it's clear that this emotional attachment is really more on the side of guns than it is on the side of gun regulation for most of the conversation.
So, Jesse Kelly, would you agree at the very least that something needs to be done? So this past weekend, a young couple in their early 20s, broke the bones of their 2-month-old baby in trying to protect it while they were shot dead from a random mass shooter who came out of nowhere when they were just on a morning out, right? You accept that that's not normal, that's not right, something needs to be done?
I don't know anybody in the world that thinks that that's okay. It's horrific. As a parent of 2 kids, it's absolutely horrible. But yes, something needs to be done. What needs to be done is people need to go down to their local gun store and gun range, familiarize themselves with weapons, go to a range, make sure you learn how to use a weapon safely, make sure you are fast and deadly with it, and make sure you carry it everywhere, because the truth of the matter is all these pontificating politicians, Democrats, Republicans, whatever it may be, they will not be there to save you when the next psychopath walks into a Walmart with a weapon. You will have to save yourself. You're either going to be prepared to do so or you're going to be a sheep.
Okay, final comment to Qasim Rashid in less than 30 seconds, please, because I got to wrap.
I would simply say this, that when we talk about gun legislation, we're not talking about taking guns away from law-abiding citizens. We're talking about preventing extremists and terrorists from getting guns. Part of the responsibility of why we elect public servants is to pass legislation that protects us. They are failing at that right now. Republicans and Democrats alike want responsible gun legislation. It's time politicians acted. And if they're not going to act to change laws, it's time to change politicians and elect responsible people willing to serve the people, not the NRA or the gun lobby.
Okay. It feels like Groundhog Day because we keep on having this discussion after every one of these terrible atrocities. Qasim Rashid, Jesse Kelly, and Joseph Parrott, I've got to move on, but I thank you very much for joining us.